Today I have a story for you. It is a simple story about something new in my life. It is about a small house, an empty piece of land, and a new beginning. Before we begin, I have a question for you. Do you have a favorite plant or flower? It can be big or small, a tree or a little flower in a pot. Please tell me in the comments below. My name is Leo. Last year I moved to a new house. It was a small house. I liked it very much. The house had one bedroom, one bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room. The walls were white. The floors were wood. It was a simple, quiet house on a simple, quiet street. I was happy with my new home. I put my books on a shelf. I put my pictures on the wall. I put my favorite blue chair near the window. From the window, I could see the street. I could see other houses. I could see people walk their dogs. It was a nice view, but there was another view from another window. This view was not nice. This view was from the kitchen. The kitchen had a door. This door went to the backyard. The backyard was my problem. It was not a garden. It was just a square of land. And it was very, very sad. The ground was not soft green grass. It was hard, brown dirt. The dirt was very dry. When the wind was strong, the dust went everywhere. There were also many stones, small grey stones and big grey stones. They were everywhere. It was like a small grey desert behind my house. There was an old wooden fence around the backyard. The fence was grey too. The wood was old and some parts were broken. There were no plants. There were no flowers. There were no trees. There was nothing. Just dirt and stones and an old tired fence. It was an empty place. A sad place. Every morning I made my coffee in the kitchen. I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. I felt a little sad. My house was nice and clean and happy inside, but the backyard was ugly and empty outside. It made my new home feel not complete. I did not like to go into the backyard. I opened the door sometimes to take out the trash. I walked on the hard dirt. The stones made a crunching sound under my feet. I did not stay there for a long time. I went back inside my house quickly. The backyard was a place for nothing. It had no purpose. It was just there. For many weeks, I did not think much about the backyard. I was busy with my new house. I painted a wall in the living room. I bought a new lamp. I organized my kitchen. I met my neighbors. My neighbors were nice. My neighbor on the left was an old woman. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She had a beautiful garden. Her garden was full of flowers. Red flowers, yellow flowers, pink flowers. I could see her flowers from my bedroom window. They were bright and happy. My neighbor on the right was a young family. They had 2 small children. Their backyard had a small swing and a place for the children to play. Their backyard was full of life and sound, and my backyard was in the middle, silent, empty, and grey. It was a sad piece of land between 2 happy places. One day I was reading a magazine. It was a magazine about houses. I saw a picture. The picture was of a small backyard, like my backyard. But it was not empty. It was full of life. There were green plants in wooden boxes. There were red tomatoes on a tall plant. There were bright yellow flowers near a small stone path. A small wooden table and 2 chairs were in the corner. It was beautiful. It was a happy place. I looked at the picture for a long time. I looked at the green leaves. I looked at the red tomatoes. I thought about my sad grey backyard. I looked at the picture again. I thought, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can make a garden. The idea was very new to me. I was not a gardener. I knew nothing about plants. I lived in an apartment before this house. I had 1 small plant in a pot in my apartment. It died. I did not know why it died. Maybe I gave it too much water. Maybe I gave it not enough water. I did not know. The idea of a whole garden was big. It was a little scary. I thought about the hard dirt and all the stones. It was a lot of work, but I could not stop thinking about the picture in the magazine. I wanted that. I wanted a happy place behind my house. I wanted to see green things and colorful flowers from my kitchen window. That day, I made a decision. It was a big decision for me. I decided I will make a garden. I will change my sad backyard into a happy place. I did not know how, but I knew I wanted to try. The next day was Saturday. I woke up early. I felt excited. Today was the first day of my garden project. But I had a problem. I knew nothing. Where do I start? I did not have any tools. I did not have any seeds. I did not have any knowledge. So my first step was not in the backyard. My first step was to the library. The library in my town is a nice, quiet place. I went to the section about gardening. There were many books, big books with many difficult words. I was looking for a simple book, a book for a beginner, a book for someone who knows zero. I found a book with a picture of a smiling sun and a happy flower on the cover. The title was Gardening for Everyone. It looked perfect. I found another book called Your First Vegetable Garden. I took both books. I sat at a table and I started to read. The books had many pictures. This was good for me. I saw pictures of tools. I learned their names: a shovel, a rake, a watering can, gloves. These were important words. I wrote them down in a small notebook I brought with me. Shovel, rake, watering can, gloves. I read about soil. The book said good plants need good soil. My backyard had hard, dry dirt. It was not good soil. The book said I needed to buy bags of good soil, called topsoil or compost. It was dark and full of good things for plants. I wrote buy good soil in my notebook. Then I read about plants. The book said some plants are easy for beginners. It gave a list. For vegetables, it said lettuce, radishes, and tomatoes were good to start. For flowers, it said marigolds and sunflowers were easy. I liked tomatoes. I really liked tomatoes. I decided I wanted to grow tomatoes. And I liked the name marigolds. It sounded friendly. I wrote tomato seeds and marigold seeds in my notebook. I read for 2 hours. I learned about sun. Plants need sun. I needed to watch my backyard. Where is the sun in the morning? Where is the sun in the afternoon? This was important for where to put the plants. I felt like a student. I was learning a new language, the language of gardens. After the library, my next stop was the garden store. The garden store was big and full of green things. It smelled fresh, like rain and earth. I felt a little lost. There were so many things. I looked at my list: shovel, rake, watering can, gloves. I walked down a long aisle with tools. I found a shovel. It was heavy. I found a rake. It had many metal teeth. I found a small green watering can. It looked friendly. I found a pair of thick gloves to protect my hands. I put all these things in my shopping cart. The cart was getting full. Next, I needed soil. I found big, heavy bags of dark soil. The bag said, garden soil. I remembered the word from the book. I was very heavy. I took one big bag. It was hard to put it in my cart. Finally, I needed the seeds. This was the exciting part. I went to a wall with hundreds of small paper packets. Each packet had a picture on it. A picture of a beautiful vegetable or a bright flower. It was like a wall of promises. I found the tomato seeds. The picture showed big, red, round tomatoes. They looked delicious. I took one packet. Then I looked for the marigolds. I found them. The picture showed bright orange and yellow flowers. They looked like small suns. I took a packet of orange marigolds. I had everything on my list. I went to pay. The man at the counter was old and had a kind smile. He saw my things. He said, "Starting a new garden?" I nodded. I said, "Yes, it is my first time." He smiled more. "That's wonderful," he said. "Remember to give them water and sun. And be patient. A garden teaches you to be patient. I paid for my things. I pushed the heavy cart to my car. I felt very happy. I had my books. I had my tools. I had my soil and my seeds. I had a plan. The journey of my garden was starting. When I got home, I put everything in the backyard. The new clean tools looked strange in the old sad yard. The bright green watering can sat on the grey stones. The colourful seed packets were like little flags of hope. I was ready to work. The book said the first step was to prepare the ground. This meant I needed to remove the stones and break up the hard dirt. It sounded simple in the book. It was not simple in my backyard. I put on my new gloves. They felt strong. I took my new shovel. I pushed it into the ground. It did not go in. The ground was like a rock. I pushed harder. The shovel went in a little bit. I lifted some dirt. It was full of stones. I decided to make a small area for my garden first. Not the whole backyard, just a small square, maybe 2 meters by 2 meters. A small start. I put a string on the ground to make a square shape. This was my garden bed. My first job was to take out all the stones inside this square. I sat on the ground and I started to pick up the stones. One by one, small stones, big stones, flat stones, round stones. I made a pile of stones outside the square. My back started to hurt a little. It was slow work. I worked for 1 hour. I only cleared a small part of the square. The pile of stones was getting bigger and bigger. I did not know there were so many stones. It was like the backyard was a big box of stones. After 2 hours, my hands were tired. My back was sore, but the small square was almost free of stones. It looked different already. It was just brown dirt now. No grey stones inside my square. This made me feel good. I saw progress. The next step was to dig. I used the shovel. Now without the stones, the shovel went into the dirt. It was still hard, but it was possible. I dug up the dirt. I turned it over. The book called this tilling the soil. I was tilling my soil. The dirt was in big, hard clumps. I used the shovel to break the clumps. It was hard work. I was sweating. The sun was warm. I stopped for a drink of water. I looked at my work. It was a mess of brown dirt. But it was a good mess. It was the mess of creation. I worked for another hour. I broke all the big clumps of dirt. Now the dirt was smaller and softer. Then I used the rake. I pulled the rake over the dirt. The rake made the surface smooth and flat. My small square of dirt was now a clean, flat bed. It was ready for the next step, the good soil. I went to the big, heavy bag of garden soil. I opened it. The soil inside was dark brown, almost black. It smelled wonderful. It smelled like a forest after rain. It was soft and a little wet. It was nothing like my hard grey dirt. I used a small bucket to carry the new soil to my garden bed. I poured the dark, rich soil on top of my old, tired dirt. I spread it with the rake. It was like putting a warm blanket on a cold bed. I used the whole bag of soil. My garden bed now had a thick layer of beautiful dark soil. It looked so good. It looked like a real garden bed now. I touched the new soil with my hands. It was soft. It felt full of life. The hard work of cleaning and digging was finished. The difficult part was over. Now the fun part could begin. It was time to plant the seeds. I was very excited to plant the seeds. This felt like the most important part. It was the moment I put life into the ground. I had my 2 small packets. One with the picture of red tomatoes. One with the picture of orange marigolds. I decided to plant the tomatoes on one side of the square and the marigolds on the other side. I read the instructions on the back of the tomato seed packet. The words were very small. Plant seeds 1 centimeter deep. Plant them 30 centimeters apart. 1 centimeter. That is very small. I used my finger to make a small hole in the dark soil. I tried to make it about 1 centimeter deep. It was not easy to be exact, but I tried my best. Then, I opened the seed packet. The tomato seeds were tiny. They were flat and yellow and very, very small. It was amazing that a big tomato plant could grow from this tiny thing. I took one small seed and I put it in the small hole. It looked so small and lonely in the big garden bed. I covered the seed with a little bit of soil. I gently pressed the soil down. I felt a big feeling of hope. I was planting hope in my garden. I made more holes, each 30 centimeters apart. In each hole, I put one tiny tomato seed. I talked to the seeds in my head. I said, "Grow strong, please grow." Then I did the same thing for the marigolds. I read the instructions on their packet. Plant seeds 1 centimeter deep. Plant them 20 centimeters apart. I made small holes on the other side of my garden bed. I opened the marigold seed packet. These seeds were different. They were black and long and thin, like tiny little sticks. I put one marigold seed in each hole. I covered them with soil. Now all my seeds were in the ground. I could not see them. They were hidden in the dark, warm soil. My work was almost done for the day. There was one last step, a very important step: water. I took my new green watering can. I filled it with water from the tap outside my house. The water was cool and clear. I walked back to my garden bed. The book said to water gently. I tilted the watering can. The water came out in a soft shower, like gentle rain. I watered the whole garden bed. I watched the dark soil drink the water. It became even darker. The air smelled fresh. My seeds were now in their new home. They had good soil. They had water. And the sun was shining. They had everything they needed. I stood and looked at my work. I saw a small, dark, wet square of soil. It did not look like much, but I knew what was inside. It was full of tiny seeds. It was full of potential. It was the beginning of my garden. I was very tired. My body was sore from all the digging and lifting. My hands were dirty, even with the gloves. But I was not sad. I was very, very happy. I went inside my house. I made a cup of tea. I sat in my kitchen and I looked out the window. I did not see a sad, empty backyard anymore. I saw a place of possibility. I saw my garden. The next morning, the first thing I did was look out the kitchen window. The small dark square was still there. It looked exactly the same. Of course it did. I knew plants did not grow in one night, but a small part of me hoped to see a little green. There was no green, just brown. The man at the garden store said I needed to be patient. I remembered his words, patience. So my new routine began. Every morning I woke up, went to the kitchen, and looked at my garden bed. Nothing. Then I took my green watering can, filled it with water, and gave my seeds a drink. I did this every day. The weather was warm. The sun was shining almost every day. It was good weather for a new garden. I read my gardening books more. I learned that seeds need time to germinate. Germinate was a new word for me. It means to wake up and start to grow. The seed packet for the tomatoes said germination takes 5 to 10 days. The marigolds packet said 4 to 7 days. So, I had to wait. Waiting was hard. Every day for 5 days, I saw nothing. Just the same flat, dark soil. I started to worry. Did I do something wrong? Did I plant the seeds too deep? Did I plant them not deep enough? Did I give them too much water? Or not enough water? So many questions. So many doubts. I felt a little anxious. Maybe my one dead plant in my old apartment was a sign. Maybe I was not a person who could grow things. On the 6th day, I woke up and went to the window, like always. I looked, and I saw something. It was very, very small. So small I was not sure if it was real. I went outside. I got very close to the ground. I looked very carefully at the side with the marigold seeds. And there it was, a tiny, tiny loop of green, pushing out of the soil. It was not a leaf yet. It was just a little green arch. It was the first sign of life. I felt a huge wave of happiness. It worked. I did it. One of my seeds was growing. I was so excited. I wanted to tell someone, but I was alone in my house. So I just smiled a very big smile at the tiny green thing. I felt like a proud father. The next day, there were more. 3 more little green loops on the marigold side. And then, on the 8th day, I saw the first sign of a tomato plant. It looked different from the marigolds. It was 2 very small long leaves, pointing up from the soil. They were so delicate, so perfect. In 2 weeks, my garden bed was not empty anymore. It was covered with tiny green plants, small seedlings. The marigolds had small lacy leaves. The tomato plants had small pointed leaves. They were all small and green, but I could see they were different. They were alive, and I helped them come to life. My daily routine changed a little. I still watered them every morning, but now I also spent time just looking at them. I watched them grow. It was amazing how quickly they changed. Every day they were a little bit bigger. A new leaf would appear. They grew taller, reaching for the sun. I felt a connection to these little plants. They were my responsibility. Their life depended on me. It was a good feeling. It gave me a purpose. My little green plants were growing, but they were not alone. Other plants started to grow in my garden bed too. These plants looked different. They grew very fast, faster than my tomatoes and marigolds. I did not plant them. At first, I was happy to see more green things. But then I read my gardening book. The book had a chapter called Weeds. Weeds are plants that you do not want in your garden. They grow fast and they take water and food from your good plants. The pictures in the book looked like the strange new plants in my garden bed. I learned a new part of gardening, weeding. So, I had a new job. Every few days, I had to take out the weeds. I sat on the ground next to my garden bed. I learned to see the difference between a weed and my plants. The weeds had different leaves. I had to pull them out of the soil. It was important to get the root of the weed. If you leave the root, the weed will grow back. Some weeds were easy to pull. They came out of the soft soil with a small pop. Some weeds had long, strong roots. They were difficult to pull. I had to be careful not to pull my good plants by mistake. Weeding was not exciting work. It was quiet and slow, but it was important. While I was pulling the weeds, I could look at my plants very closely. I could see how much they grew. I could see the small hairs on the stem of the tomato plants. I could see the beautiful pattern of the marigold leaves. It was a peaceful time. It was just me and my small growing garden. Then a new problem came. One morning, I went outside to water my plants. I looked at the lettuce I planted in a small corner a few weeks after the tomatoes. Some of the leaves were gone. There were small bites taken out of the leaves that were left. I was very upset. Who was eating my plants? I looked around. I saw some small footprints in the soil. They were from a rabbit. A small brown rabbit was eating my garden. I felt angry. I worked so hard on this garden. It was my garden, not a restaurant for rabbits. I did not want to hurt the rabbit, but I wanted it to stop eating my plants. I went back to my gardening book. I looked for a chapter on animals. The book had some ideas. It said some animals do not like certain smells. It also said a small fence can help. I decided to try both. I went back to the garden store. I bought a small roll of wire fence. It was not very tall, just about 50 centimeters high. I also bought some powder that had a strong smell that rabbits do not like. The next day, I put the small fence around my garden bed. It was not a beautiful fence, but it was functional. Then I put the powder on the ground around the outside of the fence. It smelled like garlic and spices. I hoped it would work. The next morning, I checked my plants. No new bites. The fence and the powder were working. I felt relieved. I learned another lesson. A garden is not just about planting and watering. It is also about protecting. It is a small battle against weeds and hungry rabbits. You have to pay attention. You have to solve problems. It made me feel more like a real gardener. The weeks passed. Spring turned into summer. The sun was warmer and the days were longer. My plants loved the summer. They grew bigger and stronger every day. My small garden bed was not a small patch of dirt with a few tiny leaves anymore. It was a small jungle of green. The tomato plants were now tall. They were not strong enough to stand on their own. Their stems were long and flexible. I read in my book that tomato plants need support. They need something to climb on. So I went to the store again. I bought some long wooden stakes and some soft green string. I pushed a stake into the ground next to each tomato plant. I was very gentle. I did not want to hurt the roots. Then, I used the soft string to tie the stem of the up plant to the stake. This helped the plant stand up straight and tall. Now they looked like proud soldiers in my garden. The marigold plants grew too. They were not tall like the tomatoes. They were short and bushy. They had many leaves. They filled up their side of the garden bed. The whole square was now completely green. I could not see the dark soil anymore. One morning, I saw something new on the tomato plants. There were small yellow flowers. They were very pretty. I was so happy to see them. I knew from my book that the flowers were the first step. After the flowers, the tomatoes would come. I checked the plants every day, waiting for the flowers to change. A few days later, I saw the small yellow flowers fall off. In their place, there was a tiny, hard, green ball. It was the beginning of a tomato. It was so small, like a little green pea. I touched it very gently. It was amazing. This little green ball would become a big, red tomato. I felt a deep sense of wonder. I was watching a miracle happen in my own backyard. The marigolds had their own surprise. Small buds appeared among the green leaves. A few days later, the buds started to open. The first flower was a bright, beautiful orange. It was like a small piece of the sun was sitting in my garden. Soon, there were more orange flowers. My garden was not just green anymore. It was green and orange. The color was so bright and happy. It made me smile every time I saw it. My backyard was completely transformed. It was not a sad, gray, empty place. It was a place full of life and color. I bought the small wooden table and 2 chairs I saw in the magazine picture. I put them in a corner of the backyard. In the evenings, after work, I would sit at the table. I would drink a glass of water and just look at my garden. The sun would be going down. The air would be cool. I could hear the sounds of birds. I could smell the fresh scent of the plants and the soil. It was my peaceful place, my sanctuary. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor with the beautiful flower garden, saw my garden over the fence. One day she said to me, "Your garden is looking lovely, Leo. You have a green thumb." I did not know this expression. I asked her what a green thumb means. She explained it means you are good at gardening. I felt very proud. I told her it was my first garden. She was surprised. She gave me some advice about my tomato plants. She was very kind and helpful. I felt like I was part of a club now, the Club of Gardeners. The small green balls on the tomato plants grew bigger every day. Soon they were the size of a small cherry, then the size of a golf ball. They were still hard and green. I learned again about patience. A tomato does not turn red in one day. It takes time, a lot of time. I watched them every day. I was waiting for the first sign of red. The summer was hot. I had to water my garden every day. Sometimes, in the evening, I would water it again if the soil was dry. The plants were big now, and they were very thirsty. It was a responsibility, but I enjoyed it. Taking care of my garden was a calm and happy part of my day. One afternoon, I was looking at the tomatoes, and I saw it. On one of the biggest tomatoes, at the very bottom, there was a small patch of orange-red color. It was starting to change. My heart jumped with excitement. The moment was coming. The moment I was waiting for, since I planted that tiny seed. Over the next week, the color spread. The small patch of orange-red grew bigger and bigger. The tomato slowly changed from green to yellow, then to orange, and finally to a beautiful, bright red. It was perfect. It was round and shiny, and very, very red. It was ready. I decided to wait one more day, just to be sure. I wanted it to be perfectly ripe. The next day was a sunny Saturday. I went into my garden. The red tomato was shining in the sun. It was time. I reached out my hand. I held the tomato gently. It was warm from the sun. I twisted it a little, and it came off the plant easily. I was holding it in my hand. My first tomato, the first thing I ever grew in my own garden. I looked at it for a long time. It was not just a tomato. It was a symbol of all my hard work. I remembered the day I spent cleaning the stones. I remembered the hard work of digging the soil. I remembered my worry when the seeds did not grow. I remembered pulling the weeds and building the small fence. All that work was here, in my hand, in the form of a perfect red tomato. I felt an incredible sense of accomplishment. I took the tomato inside to the kitchen. I washed it carefully under cool water. I put it on a white plate. It looked like a jewel. I cut it into slices with a sharp knife. The inside was a beautiful red color, and it was full of juice. The smell was amazing. It smelled fresh and sweet, like a real tomato, not like the tomatoes from the big supermarket. I took a slice and I ate it. It was the best tomato I have ever tasted in my entire life. It was sweet and juicy and full of flavor. The flavor of the sun and the good soil and my hard work. It was more than just food. It was joy. It was success. It was a taste of what I had created. I grew many more tomatoes that summer. I had so many, I could not eat them all. I gave some to Mrs. Gable. She was very happy. She gave me some of her beautiful flowers in return. I gave some to the young family next door. Their children loved the small cherry tomatoes I grew on another plant. Sharing the food I grew was a special kind of happiness. I also had many orange marigolds. They bloomed all summer long. They made my garden a cheerful, bright place. Bees and butterflies loved them. My garden was not just for me. It was a small home for insects too. It was a part of the nature around my house. I learned so much that summer. I learned how to be a gardener. I learned about soil and seeds and sun and water. I learned about weeds and pests. But I learned more than just gardening. I learned about patience. A garden does not grow in a day. Good things take time. You have to wait. You have to trust the process. I learned about hard work. Creating something beautiful requires effort. Sometimes your back hurts and you are tired, but the result is worth it. I learned about paying attention. You have to look at your plants every day. You have to notice the small changes. You have to see the problems before they become big problems. And I learned about the joy of creation, taking an empty, sad piece of land and turning it into a living, breathing garden full of food and color was one of the most satisfying things I have ever done. The summer ended. Autumn came. The leaves on the trees changed color. My tomato plants stopped making new tomatoes. The marigold flowers started to fade. The garden was getting tired. It was time for it to rest. I cleaned the garden bed. I pulled out the old plants. The soil was still dark and rich. It was ready for next year. The backyard was quiet again, but it was not a sad quiet. It was a peaceful quiet. It was a place full of memories. It was not empty anymore. It was full of the story of my first garden. Now, when I sit in my kitchen and I look out the window, I don't see a problem. I see my garden. In the winter, it is sleeping under a blanket of snow. But I know that under the snow, the good soil is waiting. And I am waiting too. I am already planning my garden for next year. Maybe I will grow cucumbers. Maybe I will try to grow carrots. I have my books and my notes. I am not a beginner anymore. I am a gardener, and my small happy house finally feels complete. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing for more stories like this.